Welcome. I am so glad you are with me today. We're going to talk about this very important concept of do irides change? It's such an important concept because there is some misinformation out there that just doesn't seem to want to go away. And so we want to show some proof of whether eyes change or not. As we look at this first set of eyes, this was taken with my very first iridology camera, which was my second iridology camera, which was an 8 megapixel digital camera. Now, as we look at this, what you will notice is that we have these big dark patches in this eye where it looks like there's nothing in them. It just looks kind of cavernous and empty in there. And so a couple of years later, I got a new iridology camera. So this was 8 megapixel digital with an incandescent ring flash. A few years later, when I got a 24 megapixel with an LED light, this is what I saw instead. These areas actually were not cavernous. They were not empty. The pigment, this is pigment, is actually splattered on the surface of the stroma. So we're not looking into a black hole, excuse me, we are looking at the surface of the eye and how the pigment is sitting on the top of the eye, more prominently in the right eye than in the left eye. Now, when we look at these photos side by side, here is what we see. These photos were taken about 2 years apart. And there are many people who would say, oh, wow, did that person ever do some great cleansing? No, this person did no cleansing at all. This person had a pretty good diet, but likes his beer and is not always perfect with his foods. What we see, though, is that because of the low resolution, 8 megapixels versus 24 megapixels, we see more clarity in the newer photo. The real defining thing here, however, is the skin tones. Look at how different the skin tones are. Remember, I said this was an 8 megapixel camera with an incandescent ring flash. Incandescent always has more of a yellow tone to it. The image on the right is a 24 megapixel digital camera with an LED flash. LED always shoots a little bluer. So the difference in the skin tones, the difference in the eye color is nothing to do with cleansing. It's everything to do with technology, with strength of technology and the color of the light. This is so important. So we do not see, this is not an eye has changed. This is the technology has changed. So a better question than do eyes change is what changes can we see in the irides? Let's have a look. The first and most important change to be aware of is that pigment may be acquired or may become more dense. Let's look at a few examples of this. So we need to remember as we look at these images that pigment tells us that there is an organ that may be genetically programmed to be out of balance and that imbalance will show up over time. So as we look at the image on the left, this was taken with my very first iridology camera, and I know that because of the shape of the flash here. It was an incandescent flash, and it was a film print camera. So I used to shoot on Kodak film, and it was well known that Kodak always developed a little to the red tones, unless you did the color test at the beginning, where you took a photo of the Kodak film box as the very first shot of every roll, and then when you took the roll into the lab for developing, you would say, please develop this so that the first box matches a Kodak film box. And they would adjust the settings on their machinery, on their developing stuff, so because it's all not done by hand anymore, right? It was all done electronically, not digitally, but electronically back then. And by adjusting that first image to match a Kodak film box, it would give the correct color for everything else on the roll. So as we look at this, I want you to pay attention to some key markers that we see that show that the eye on the left is the same eye that's on the right, with about a 20-year gap in between. We have a jut out in the collarette at about 9:30, another one close to 12 o'clock, and another one at about 4:45. So as we look at this, accounting for the fact that these cameras are both handheld, so there might be a slight tilt difference, we have the one that's at about 9:45, the one that's at about 12 o'clock, and the one that's at about 4:45. But again, the image on the right has a slight tilt to it, or the image on the left had a tilt to it, so they're not both perfectly level. What we see is the image on the left, down here between 6 o'clock and faintly up to just past 8 o'clock, there is nothing. Nothing. When we look at the image on the right, we see this accumulation of pigment. So this tells us that the liver is likely genetically programmed to be under stress, and that the liver is creating some issues for some other organs, because the liver does over 500 different jobs in the body. And so if it's missing out on doing one of those jobs correctly, it's going to cause stress elsewhere. Here's another example of acquired pigmentation. Again, this first image was taken about 20 or so years ago. The second image was taken about 2 years ago. The incandescent flash on the left, the LED light on the right. You can tell from the pupil size that the incandescent light is not as bright. That is what accounts for the difference in the pupil size. Okay, we're going to talk about pupil size in a moment, but for now we'll just leave it at the brightness of the light, as you know, changes pupil size, right? And so let's find some markers here that we can say, is this the same eye or not? And so what we're looking at first is, let's look for this fiber right here, coming down from about 4 o'clock to, 4:20, is sitting right here in the image on the right. We also have a fiber here at about 7:30 or so that swings down, and we've got that right here. Whoops, I did not mean to do that. There we go. We also have a pigment that's pointing upwards here, and we see that clearly in the image on the right. So we've ascertained that these are the same iris. Now let's look for pigment differences. When we look for this pigment, notice this fiber that's swinging down here. We find that here. There is no significant pigment in here. So this pigment has acquired. This pigment in the newer photo that is sitting at roughly 8 o'clock should be sitting right here, and it's not in the older photo. This pigment that is sitting at roughly 4:30, again, is absent in the older photo. So again, the pigment has acquired over time. Notice the difference in how these images appear because of the difference in technology. The color difference is so important. So important. There is no camera that actually shoots and produces an image with 100% color accuracy that I've experienced, at least not as far as eyes go. Maybe there is for other things, but not for eyes. I have tweaked and fiddled with the white balance in my camera in all kinds of ways to try to create an image that is actually really close. Now, we have the added challenge of every computer monitor is also set to different specs for how it shows color. And so what shows up on your camera might be 100% spot on, but when you put it into your computer, it might look different. So you need to be aware of that too. This is not the effect of cleansing. Certainly the accumulation here is not the effect of cleansing, right? We accumulate pigment and it gives us information about the body. The lipemic diathesis, this white milky ring that is coming around the perimeter of this iris, is also acquired. This suggests a liver enzyme imbalance that can be compromising to the integrity of the circulatory system. And what we will see with time is we will see this develop from nothing to something thicker, to something more opaque, and it just gets wider and more thick-looking, more opaque-looking with time. I've never seen a child with one of these. The youngest I've seen this in an adult is the age of 24, but it's very common to see these developing over time, particularly after the age of 50. The pupil shape may change. This is very dynamic. This correlates very specifically to the spinal alignment. So if the spine is chronically misaligned, we will see the pupil shape change to reflect the misalignment of the spine. What that means when we see something like this is we need to recommend to our client that they do appropriate spinal care, whatever is right for them, whether it's chiropractic or Dorn or Rolfing or yoga or whatever helps them to align their spine. Maybe it's massage. They need to be doing it in order to correct the alignment of the spine and thereby correct the nerve flow through the spinal cord to the rest of the body. Transversals, which are fibers that go skittering across other fibers, may become vascularized. Okay, and reflexives, we could put reflexives in here too. So when we think about the nervous system, we know that the nerves are coated with a myelin sheath. And if that myelin sheath disintegrates, we have MS. So we know that coatings in the body can disintegrate. Every fiber in the iris is coated with collagen, and that's what makes the fibers appear whitish. If that collagen disintegrates, it reveals what that fiber really is, which is a very fine capillary or capillary. And so capillaries or capillaries are red. If that sheath, if that collagen sheath has disintegrated, we are going to see red. Now, I will tell you, I have never yet had the privilege of doing a series of annual photos with a client and seeing the vascularization happen over time. This client that you're looking at on my screen has had vascularized reflexives in her eyes for the 25 years or so that I've known her. Again, tophi may become discolored. Again, I've never had the opportunity yet, because I've just gotten my really great photography equipment in the last 2 years, of doing annual photos over the long term of one client to see if tophi actually do discolor, but I've been taught that they do. And so I'm watching for that now as I do annual photos when my clients return annually to double check and see if there are changes in the irides. The circulatory ring may become more prominent. So this purplish haze here may become darker, or it may become wider, or it may extend more around the eye and become more obvious in aspects of the perimeter that it was not obvious before. So again, signifying that there may be further breakdown or further compromise in the circulatory system. Ways irides do not change: healing lines. When I first learned iridology 35 or 40 years ago, we learned that when we had a shape like this, these were healing lines. This meant healing was happening in the area. What we understand now actually is that this mark is permanent, and these marks have always been there. We understand now that the eye is made up of layers of fiber. And what that means is the top layer, and I can't bend my wrist the right way to do that, the top layer is the one, we'll do it like this, that has the hole in it, so to speak. And what we're looking at is the next layer down. Through that hole, we're seeing the next layer down, where we're seeing the fibers of that second layer. So these are not a healing indication. They are simply the second layer of the stroma of the eye. So they're not going to increase. They're not going to decrease. They're not going to magically appear or disappear. They've just always been there because that is this person's genetic situation. This is their genetic gift. It's how they are. These lacunae, again, I remember doing an iridology class very early on where the teacher had an eye like this and then had other photos where the pupil was smaller. And he noted, and this is the same eye all the way across, again, different technology. Second iridology camera I ever owned, which was the 8 megapixel, my current 24 megapixel. But you'll notice what we see is the pupil is very large here because this light is not super bright. And this part of the eye looks very narrow. And because all of the tissue between the iris edge and the limbus is squished into a narrower range, it means that that lacuna had to squish as well, which made it look fatter. Imagine it's like a balloon. If you've got a long balloon and you squish it end to end, it gets fatter, right? That's exactly what's happening here. So as the pupil gets smaller, that balloon then stretches out a little bit. It becomes a little bit thinner. And when the pupil is the smallest, that balloon is stretched out longer and is much thinner, much thinner. So that's what we're looking at here. But in my one of my first iridology classes, they said this and this showed that there was healing. Did not account for the amount of light in the eye. Did not account for the size of the pupil. So this is so important. Again, this is not the result of healing. This is the result of a change in technology. And that change in technology, changing the camera, changing the settings within one camera, changing the amount of light that camera is using, will change the color. It will change the size, the apparent size and shape of the lacuna. It will make a lot of things look different. So lacuna do not get smaller. It's like a balloon that when it's squished, it gets fatter. When it's stretched out, it gets longer and narrower. It's the same balloon. We also know that pigments don't go away. Pigment accumulates. The irides are cumulative, not dispersive. So when they gather something in, when something is settled, it's not going to go away. Again, here we have an image that's about 20 years old, one that's about 2 years old, same eye. Look for those key markers that show you this is the same eye. Right? We see those key markers. Now let's look for pigment. In the right eye, we have a pigment at about 245 and another pigment at about 845. Those pigments are not in the older image on the left. So the pigments have acquired. This was one of my children when he was quite young, and this is him as an adult. Yeah, some parents collect school photos, annual photos. I collect annual eye photos. All right, so with that, I just want to share with you that tomorrow we have a very interesting webinar coming up. So that is on tomorrow, May 22nd, 2019 at 12 noon. We are going to do how iridology can help us understand female hormone imbalances. And I'll be redoing it again live at 6 o'clock. These are Mountain Daylight time, so check your time zones. Different registration for each webinar time. So if you'd like to join me for how iridology can help us understand female hormone imbalances on Wednesday, May 22nd at 12 noon, please use the bit.ly link female-early. If you'd like to join me at 6 p.m. Mountain Daylight time, female-late. In this class, not only will I be talking about female hormone imbalances, but I will be sharing information with you about my upcoming course, Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology. This course starts on Wednesday, July 17th, and this is the early registration link. Class time will be 12 noon to 2 p.m. Few more basic details here. It is taught through 20 live 2-hour webinars. I teach the full IPA curriculum. So by the time we have finished our time together, You will be prepared to certify, to do all the steps for certification with IPA if you choose to do that. And my course includes mentorship for students who want to certify. Now, the early bird registration is only going to be available till June 19th. And what does that mean? It means there is a little discount for those who register before June 19th. However, when I opened registration on May 8th, I sold 60% of the seats. I only have room for 10 students. 6 of those seats are already taken. So early bird registration is open until June 19th or until I hit 10 students in the class, at which time we will close registration because I insist on keeping my classes small so that my students get all the benefit of having an intimate class and being able to ask questions. So I hope you will join me tomorrow to learn more about how iridology can help us understand female hormone imbalances and to learn more about Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology that is starting in just 8 weeks. Thanks for being with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the webinar on May 22nd. Bye for now.